Wise men do not shout. They walk away in silence from those who will not listen. When I was young, I tried to change the world with words. When I was older, I realized that most people can barely change their own minds, so I began to save my breath. There is a reason why wise men talk less. They know that life is too short to waste time with people who only want to hear the echo of their own voices. If I could go back in time, I would not change the words I said. I would only change the people I said them to. Some conversations only serve to waste intelligence. Fools argue to prove they are right. Wise men keep quiet to prove that the argument is not worth having. And in the end, guess who gets the peace? Before continuing, just check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because I am preparing a special series with the best quotes from Mark Twain to help you face life with more ease and purpose. The real problem with arguing with someone who doesn't understand is that even if you win, you've lost. You've lost time, patience, and probably a few years of your life. Ah, youth, when you think you have to say something for every stupid thing you hear. Over time, you learn that silence is the most effective remedy for stupidity. It's funny how some people think they're changing the world with their loud opinions, when in reality, the world doesn't even notice they're talking. The wise man watches in silence, while the fool shouts to be heard. The difference is that the fool believes that volume gives more weight to his words. As you get older, you'll learn that there's nothing more rewarding than simply watching stupidity in silence, knowing that you don't have to be a part of it. If there's one thing I've learned with age, it's that the most heated arguments usually come from those who know the least. And what they know the least about is when to stop talking. It's funny how wisdom is very similar to laziness. Young people want to convince the whole world, but the wise learn that keeping quiet is an excellent energy saver. Silence, my friend, is not a lack of arguments, it's a lack of patience. When you realize that the debate will get you nowhere, silence becomes a brilliant answer. As time goes by, you discover that it's not the amount of words that matters, but rather the choice of when not to use them. True understanding doesn't need long explanations. When I was young, I thought I needed to correct every mistake I saw. Today, I prefer to correct only my own and let others learn from their own mistakes. Experience teaches us that true maturity is not in having all the answers, but in knowing that many questions don't even need to be asked. The greatest advantage of listening more and talking less is that you end up discovering more about others and avoiding revealing too much about yourself. When I was young, I thought winning arguments was an achievement. Today, I see that the greatest victory is simply avoiding unnecessary battles. As you grow older, you realize that life is too short to waste energy trying to explain something to someone who has already decided that they are wrong. Fools always believe that speaking louder makes them more persuasive. Those who truly understand know that understanding comes in the quietest moments. Wisdom, if you ever achieve it, comes when you realize that most people talk to themselves, not to you. Listening is a favor that is rarely repaid. I have discovered over time that the best answers are the ones you never give. They remain intact in your head, with no one to distort them. When I was young, I would engage in any debate. Today, I prefer to watch from afar, knowing that my absence not only preserves my peace of mind, but also spares others a lesson they are not ready to learn. You'll know you've matured when you realize that sometimes the best course of action is to let others say what they want, while you simply continue to live your own way. There is nothing more liberating than letting go of the need to have the last word. Time is a far more effective teacher than any well-worded speech. Experience teaches that trying to change someone's mind is like trying to stop the sun from setting, a frustrating and frankly unnecessary task. I've found that in life, it's wiser to conserve energy than to waste words on those who have already decided to take the easy way out, even if it's the wrong one. Some of the best choices I've made have been to choose not to get involved. Letting others fight their own battles has been one of the greatest acts of kindness I've ever done. It's funny how those who speak the truth the most are the least willing to hear it. If you truly value the truth, learn to save it for those who deserve it. Over time, you realize that other people's opinions of you have much more to do with themselves than with who you really are. There is no need to defend yourself against distorted reflections. One of the greatest signs of maturity is realizing that many battles are won by the simple decision not to fight. Life has taught me that listening is an underrated art. As others talk, you learn more than they do, about them and sometimes about yourself. When reason finds no willing ears, the best choice is to turn around. Some minds are like locked doors. You can knock, but you'll never be invited in. I've found that rather than trying to fix others, it's more productive to fix my own journey. After all, the only life you have control over is your own. Leave the quote that had the biggest impact on you in the comments below. I'll tell you about my favorite from this video. It goes like this: if you want to avoid regrets in old age, learn to stay away from useless arguments. There is no greater peace than letting others wallow in their own arguments. It's funny how time changes our priorities. What once seemed like a matter of life and death is now nothing more than an insignificant murmur in the back of our minds. The value of a conversation is not in what was said, but in who was actually willing to listen. And believe me, most people are just waiting for their turn to speak. The most heated debates rarely produce solutions. They only confirm that most people are more interested in winning than learning. Over time, I've learned that the most powerful words are the ones you don't say. They remain pure and free from misinterpretation. Youth strives to be understood by everyone. Maturity, however, is finding peace in being misunderstood and still living well. I've realized over the years that true victory lies in knowing when to let others believe they've won. Peace of mind is worth far more than any argument. The biggest mistake we make is believing that people want our honest opinion. Many times, they just want validation. Knowing the difference is one of the keys to living peacefully. Experience teaches us that it is wiser to preserve our own energy than to try to change the minds of those who are not willing to think beyond their own pride. I have discovered that when you stop trying to convince others, you begin to understand more about yourself. After all, what you believe does not need the approval of others. Life becomes much simpler when you realize that not all problems are yours to solve. The greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to choose your battles. One of the greatest lessons I have learned is that you do not need to correct others. Life will do it much more efficiently, and with much less effort on your part. There is no greater proof of intelligence than the ability to walk away from an argument. Those who truly understand life know that the truth does not need to be defended all the time. Maturity is realizing that you don't need approval to follow your path. Not all roads are meant to be shared, and that's perfectly okay. One of the most liberating things I've learned is the difference between being heard and being understood. Often, the two never meet in the same conversation. The world is full of people who talk, but few actually say anything worth listening to. That's why the art of listening is so rare and so valuable. In time, you realize that the answers you were looking for weren't in the words of others, but in the silence that comes from accepting that some things just don't need an answer. If there's one lesson life teaches us all, it's that not every opinion needs to be shared. Often, the greatest favor you can do for others is to spare them your view. True freedom comes when you learn to choose wisely which conversations are worth your time. And, to be honest, few of them really are. When you walk away from an argument that isn't worth having, you discover that the real prize isn't winning, but preserving peace and sanity. Some people believe that more words solve a problem. The wise know that fewer words, and perhaps no words at all, are what really bring about a solution. When I was young, I thought every battle was worth fighting. Now I know that some battles aren't worth even noticing, much less fighting. There's something funny about letting people think they're winning an argument. The wise prefer to enjoy themselves in silence, while the fool gets all worked up. In time, you realize that the reason fools shout is because they're not sure of themselves. The wise, on the other hand, are content to watch from afar without saying a word. The greatest advantage of staying silent during an argument is that no one can quote what you didn't say. And believe me, they'll try. I've found that most debates end better when you don't even get involved in them. The fool gets frustrated, and you remain at peace. At some point in your life, you realize that arguing with certain people is like trying to teach math to a cat. The most you'll get is being ignored or scratched. There's a beautiful irony in listening to a fool explain his certainties while you settle for silence. Not for lack of knowledge, but for an excess of wisdom. If I regret anything, it's having tried to correct the stubborn in my youth. Today, I've learned that time does a much better job, and best of all, it does it effortlessly. Funny how the most serious arguments of my youth have become the most ridiculous jokes of my old age. Silence would have saved me some serious headaches. When I was young, I wanted to change everyone's mind. Now, if I can change the TV channel without fighting with the remote control, I consider myself a winner. If you still need to argue to prove a point, you are far from understanding what wisdom is. The wise man does not prove anything, he simply observes. There is a certain relief in realizing that it is not your responsibility to correct every nonsense you hear. That, my friend, is wisdom. Fools spend their entire lives trying to win arguments. Wise men would rather gain peace of mind, which, frankly, is a much greater prize. The secret of wisdom is knowing when to speak and, more importantly, when to remain silent. And most of the time, remaining silent is the better choice. I have spent so much time trying to teach the ignorant that today I prefer to just watch from afar and ask myself, why did I waste so much time? The difference between the wise man and the fool is that the wise man understands that silence is more powerful than any argument, and the fool will never understand that. When I was young, I thought I had to correct all the wrong opinions. Today, I realize that some people prefer their mistakes, and well, silence is the best I can offer them. If I could offer one piece of advice to the youth, it would be this: don't waste your life trying to convince fools. There are much more pleasurable things to do, like being silent. The wise man already knows the truth, so he doesn't need to shout. And the fool, well, he shouts to convince himself that he is right. In time, you learn that some arguments are as useless as trying to argue with the wind. It will just keep blowing, and you will only run out of breath. It's funny how fools think their words have weight. The wise man knows that the real weight lies in silence, because it carries so much more meaning. There is no greater sign of wisdom than silence. And unfortunately, for some, silence is the hardest thing to achieve. Let me tell you something important. The simple fact that you took the time to listen to these lessons already makes you the most intelligent and far ahead of most people. It doesn't matter how you listen to these quotes, whether you're washing the dishes, cleaning the house, exercising, or lying down for a moment of rest. If you were able to reflect, that's what matters. Tell me in the comments below, what are you doing while listening to these lessons? But the wise man knows that silence is often more deafening than any words. If you still think you have to win every argument, then you have not yet understood what it means to live without regrets. One of the greatest regrets you can avoid in life is learning to keep quiet before it is too late. Believe me, silence solves more problems than speech. The greatest benefit of growing older is realizing that silence can be the most eloquent answer to most questions and arguments. The truly wise man does not need to shout to be heard. He knows that silence is often the only thing people really hear. Ah, the irony of spending a lifetime arguing and then realizing that what you needed most was silence and peace. Now that is the secret to a life well lived. Wisdom lies not in being heard by all, but in knowing when silence is your best response. After all, wasting words on those who will not listen is as productive as teaching a cat to play the piano. You will find that the cries of youth often echo hollowly. The truly wise know that the most intelligent do not speak much, and when they do, their words cut like a sharp knife. In time, you will realize that the best way to deal with people who do not understand the truth is to walk away in silence. They may never notice, but at least you will keep the peace and patience. It is curious how some believe that speaking louder is synonymous with being right. A wise man knows that it is often in silence that the deepest truth is revealed. There is a peculiar satisfaction in observing in silence those who think that noise will bring them wisdom. True knowledge never needed so much fanfare. Little by little, you will discover that some battles do not deserve even the kindness of a word. Silence, my dear, is the best answer to ignorance. If you spend your days trying to convince people who never wanted to understand, in the end, the only one who will be convinced will be yourself. That you have wasted precious time. There is a delicious irony in watching those who clamor for attention drown in their own noise. A wise man never lowers himself to the level of a meaningless storm. He simply moves toward the sun. When you are young, it seems that all the answers need to be shouted to the world. In old age, you will realize that true wisdom lies in knowing that there is no need to convince anyone. Funny how the people who talk the most are the ones who listen the least. The wise man prefers the tranquility of his own mind to the noise of empty arguments. Life teaches us that the loudest person in the room usually has the least understanding of what is really going on. That is why the wise choose silence. If I had $1 for every time I have silently watched someone get caught up in their own nonsense, I might have retired even sooner. There are times in life when the best thing to do is simply watch the show and keep quiet. After all, who needs drama when the world is already full of it? You will discover over the years that there is no greater regret than having given attention to someone who did not deserve it. Wisdom is learning to cut ties without needing to say a word. Some believe that wisdom comes from talking nonstop, but the wise know that the words that matter are few and spoken at the right time. The rest is just noise. The best answer to a stubborn mind is silence. Nothing confuses someone who is expecting an argument more than the serenity of someone who does not care to give one. One of the great ironies of life is that when you stop trying to prove your point to others, you finally understand your own. When you are young, you think you need to correct the world. In old age, you realize that the world does not care, and that the best choice was to walk away from those who insist on remaining blind. There is nothing more rewarding than watching fools silently try to prove a point they never had. It's like watching a poorly rehearsed play, without applauding. If I could give one piece of advice to the youth, it would be this: learn the difference between speaking and being heard. Most people confuse the two, and the wise prefer silence to useless explanations. Silence, contrary to what people think, is not a lack of words. It is the conscious choice not to waste energy on those who are not worth the effort. The greatest lesson in life is to realize that it is not worth wasting a drop of saliva trying to educate those who insist on remaining in the dark. Wisdom is knowing that silence is the best response to those who talk too much, and the irony is how deeply it disturbs them. Fools believe they need to shout to be heard, Wise people, on the other hand, know that silence has more impact than any fiery speech. There is an undeniable elegance in watching, in silence, those who spend all their energy trying to prove the improbable. A wise man knows that there is no need to participate in this spectacle. Curiously, the people who most seek wisdom are those who do not know what to do with it when they find it. That is why silence becomes the best companion. As time goes by, you will discover that regret is not for the words left unsaid, but for those wasted on those who were never ready to listen. Time teaches that the most heated debates are often the most useless. The wise man does not get involved. He simply observes and withdraws. If there is one thing that life teaches the wise, it is that there is no point in convincing those who have already decided not to learn. Silence is their best defense. True wisdom lies in knowing when to be silent. The problem is that fools never realize the value of silence until it is too late. There is a serene satisfaction in knowing that silence can be more powerful than any argument. The wise, after all, know that the truth does not need shouting. If you want to avoid bitter regrets in old age, learn early on not to argue with those who do not want to listen. Silence will always be your ally. There is nothing more ironic than seeing those who shout for attention being ignored by those who truly know the value of a well-placed word. Wise men learn to walk away in silence, for they know that wasted time trying to convince fools is a luxury they cannot afford. It is funny how some believe that the volume of their voice increases their intelligence. The wise man smiles to himself and chooses the path of tranquility. Learn that often the greatest act of wisdom is to let the noise pass. For the winds of ignorance never knock down those who remain firm in silence. In old age, you will look back and wonder how many words you wasted on those who did not deserve it. Wisdom is not waiting so long to start talking less. The greatest lesson life has taught me is this: a wise man never shouts, he walks away. Because, in the end, those who truly want to learn do not need much noise to listen. One of the greatest secrets in life is knowing who deserves your attention and who deserves only silence. After all, a wise man does not need to shout to be heard. If you can learn one thing before you grow old, let it be this: the greatest regrets come from giving attention to those who do not deserve it. Silence is the wise man's greatest defense. In youth, many believe that they must speak in order to be heard, but the truly wise man understands that it is in silence that strength lies. Walk away with serenity from those who do not hear what life is trying to teach them. There is no greater waste than trying to convince those who refuse to see. A wise man does not waste time in vain arguments. He simply walks away and goes on his way. As the years go by, you will realize that the true regrets come not from the words that were not said, but from the wrong people who were heard. Choose your circle as carefully as you would choose your steps on treacherous terrain. As you reflect on these powerful quotes from Mark Twain, remember that wisdom is not just in hearing them, but in applying them to your daily life. How many times have you found yourself stuck in limiting thoughts, or feeling like you weren't living your life to the fullest? Each of these quotes is a powerful insight to help you transform your mindset and live a more authentic and courageous life. If you feel inspired and want to continue this journey of personal development, be sure to watch the other videos on the channel. Each new quote can be the boost you need to face your challenges with greater strength and clarity.